Today's episode of Heads and Tails is recorded with Alastair Land, headmaster at the historic Harrow School, a truly global brand for education. This interview felt like a unique chance to get to know Alastair in personal detail, and we cover a great deal from his philosophy on teaching and learning, a deep dive into mentorship, and why we should be focusing on core values in education, not trends. A fantastic chance to better understand the leader of a world-renowned school like Harrow. We hope you enjoy. Okay, welcome back to Heads and Tails with me, Henry Faber. I'm one of the co-founders here at Opperton Education, and it's a real privilege and a serious scalp that I've managed to encourage Alastair Land, Headmaster of Harrow School, to join me on the show. So thank you, Alastair. Alastair is the current Headmaster of Harrow School, and that's a role he's held since 2019. But his first teaching job was actually at Eton back in 1994, if I'm not wrong. And
back in the last millennium.
Back in the last millennium, a couple of years after I was born. Until 2003, sorry, I don't mean to make you sound aged, until 2003, where he taught biology, coached rugby, directed plays, and became commanding officer of the school CCF. I know you have a military interest and a background there. Then September 2003, Alastair moved on to Winchester. It's just a greatest hits list, this, of all the best independent boys' schools in this country, where he was master in college, so he's an academic too, led natural history expeditions, chairing the adventurous training committee, I'd love to hear about that, refereeing football, serving as a running coach or the running coach. And then from 2012 to 2015, he was back at Harrow as deputy head before being appointed as head of Repton School in 2016. And here he is back at Harrow. I know he's also the governor of several leading schools, including Dulwich Prep and probably many others. Alastair, it's a real privilege to have someone of your experience with us, so thank you very much.
I sometimes wonder when I hear the biography, I'd really like to meet this person. I mean, who are they? That's a lovely introduction, Henry. Thank you.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time. You know that Opperton is obsessed with all things mentoring. I'm very proud of the work we've been doing with Harrow, actually, in the mentoring space for several years. You are one of the absolute first people kind enough to trust us. But broadly, in your experience of mentoring, have you had a mentor, a specific mentor, perhaps reflections on mentorship when you were younger as well as a student? Anything you'd be happy to share on that?
Before getting into my personal experience and valuable for this audience, what's been lovely with our work with you and Opperton and the peer mentoring education that we've done with you is that, of course, because we were an early adopter, we've been through a few cycles now. So mentees are now mentors, and when you get the product of the mentoring becoming the mentor, you can see how it works, and that wonderful virtuous cycle gets established. For me, I've been lucky to have many mentors, and I think I have many mentors still, but all of them that have been best have been either unwittingly so, either on my part or their part, and indeed entirely unappointed. There isn't someone with a business card nailed to their door saying, I drew the short straw. I'm Alastair Land's mentor. Say for number one, my wife Madeline Copin, herself a senior leader in education. She's deputy head academic at Notting Hill and Ealing High. And so, education happens a lot at home, unfortunate for our three children. I remember in the sort of the sweatiest, worst days of the pandemic, we sort of co-worked in one room in our house. And I remember the DFE emails pinging into our inboxes simultaneously on Friday afternoon. And then we turn around, look at each other and say, what are you going to do with that one? And, sharing those things has been fantastic. I did once have a moment, in fact, it happened quite recently, this Easter holiday with our children. My eldest is 13. He's about to come to senior school. And he said, Daddy, listening to you and Mummy talk, is this what senior management team meetings are like? And I thought, yeah, okay, this has got real, this has got serious. You were very kind to talk about my educational career. I would say, after Madeline, all of the chaplains in all of the schools where I have worked, school chaplains are unseen in some senses, sort of unappreciated, taken for granted. A respectable school's got to have a chaplain. But what they do in terms of knitting the entire moral fabric of the institution together, I think starts with making sure, in some respects, that the head is happy, healthy, and has a place where, with the greatest of insight and wisdom, can go and talk. And all of the chaplains I've worked with have been mentors, and I would say that carries on. And interestingly, sort of thinking about that circular bit, I started with Oppidum and the work you do with our pupils. I would say some of my former pupils are mentors to a degree in terms of the example that they set. They adopt the values that you are trying to imprint upon them with such a zeal that they sort of exceed your expectations of what you thought they might mean, and how they develop them and what they do with them in their life beyond school and university. And you see these bright lights shining, and that's exhilarating, and that has a powerful mentoring effect.
That's a lovely cyclical way to come to it. And it's also really interesting hearing you talk about the spiritual elements there in the chaplain, because you're the second head I've spoken to actually in this series who's spoken a little bit about the effect of that within a boarding environment as well, and the power it can have for religion or not. So lovely to hear you talk about that. I'd love to hear a little bit about you as a teenager or even younger. Maybe there's just one pithy anecdote you'd be happy to share that gives us a little bit of a sense of what you were like as a student.
Well, there's a little bit of me being nice to myself in this story, but it's actually a story about how it's made me, to an extent, the educationalist that I am today. I went to Manchester Grammar School, large, brilliant school in the north of England, 1,500 boys, intellectually turbocharged, incredible atmosphere, vibrant. But that day school thing of, everything happens between 8 and 4, and it's just, 8 hours every day of incredible intensity. I guess like many year sevens, I went in as a tiny scrap into a massive pond, and it didn't really fit together until I was in year 10 or 11 at best, and then the sixth form began to find my feet. So probably at about this time of year-ish, as a lower sixth, I was absolutely bowled over when two lads came to find me in the school grounds on a lunchtime. I knew them very well. I knew that they were the top two guys in the school in my year group. They were the alphas. And they said, "Alastair, you've got to come with us to see the High Master." Okay. Went to see the High Master. Might have been the first time I'd been into the High Master's study ever. And he said to one of them, "I'd like you to be the school captain, and I'd like you to be the school vice captains." And me? Least likely school vice captain. As far as the rest of the school came, it came out of nowhere. I'm still not quite sure who the teachers were, because it was in those days when all of this thing was sort of teachery and wasn't done with ballots and student voice and all the rest of it. But that pulling me from wherever they pulled me, seeing whatever they saw in me, and then pushing me enormously into the limelight, doing things like running parents' meetings and gala evenings and looking after the car parking and all of that sort of stuff, brilliantly untrained as you did in those days. That was wonderful. I grew a lot, but it also has taught me as an educationalist to look behind the screen of people who are the most likely, who are presenting serially, immaculately in front of you in a slightly contrived way, to try and look over that hedge, who's behind. And that was a very instructive moment in my life. And what's that? It's nearly 40 years ago now. So it stayed with me, and in a sense, I feel like I'm permanently paying back that debt of honor to that moment in my school life.
That's lovely. That's lovely to reflect back on. And what a school too, Manchester Grammar. I mean, must have been an amazing place to be. Still is
It was
today.
fabulous.
All these schools, similar places, different places. I'm sure there are lots that stands out for good and bad in terms of your experiences. There have probably been some really tough moments as well as some peaks. Perhaps you could share quite quickly just a low moment or a real challenge, but also similarly a high point or something that comes to mind as a bit of an Everest or a peak.
The tough moments are the moments where you have to accept the cost of the responsibility that you've accepted by being a school leader. It seems like a very dark thing to realize and to have to suggest to yourself. But in taking on this role, beyond the recruiter moments and the amazing phone calls where, you've been appointed to this and so on and so forth, you're also inevitably accepting the moment that at some point you're going to have to pick up the phone and make a desperately bad phone call, or bring someone into your study and have a conversation that no one in the room wants, but for different reasons. So dealing with death, dealing with the end of someone's employment, those sorts of things, I wouldn't want to call them inevitable, but they are a responsibility. Someone in any society, however you construct it, school, university, parish, whatever it happens to be, it has to be in that position and has to do it. Where do you go with that? You recognize you're going to do it, and you might think about how you are going to be doing it when it does happen. You don't want to dwell on it, but knowing how you could do it in the best way, which seems like an odd thing to look about. But if you're going to tell someone something awful, I think you do owe it to them to have thought about how you're going to do it in abstract, way before that type of conversation happens. It's possible to read about this. It comes back to chaplains. Chaplains tell people bad stuff quite a lot of the time. People who've had the experience, commanding officers who've had to deal with families, those sorts of things, talking to the people who've been in the wonderful schools that you've mentioned, who can enable you to make the best of those situations, so that you don't make the situation worse by handling it incompetently.
And
on the other way around.
And on the other way around, it's good. It's good. Take us to where you get that moment of joy.
The best moments, I've had some pretty astonishing moments, I have to say. Preaching in St. Paul's Cathedral on the start of our 450th anniversary, speaking to a full Royal Albert Hall for our Churchill songs. I mean, incredible. You don't have enough hair to go up on the back of your neck for those moments, and you approach them, incredibly exhilarated, mind-boggled, actually regretting it as soon as you've started doing it, because you realize it's about to be over, because they don't last very long. So actually, my realization, I think, as someone who has, as you delicately pointed out in your introduction, been doing this for a while, is realizing that best moments are happening all the time. And allowing your mind, whether it's me as a leader or anyone else in the team, the best moments aren't contrived. You don't make them. You don't orchestrate them. You don't say, and now we're all going to collectively have fun now. No. Best moments are happening every day, to teachers, to pupils. Anyone who did something today that they couldn't do yesterday, whether they're an adult or a child in the institution, that's a best moment. And then seeing that is an incredible privilege. And if you had a hand in making the atmosphere in which that could happen, so much the better. But recognizing that best isn't something you have to hold your breath and wait for, but it's part of the, the unfolding wonder that is an educational institution. That's why we stay here. That's why we keep on doing it.
That's lovely. Content. I always ask people, are you a reader? Are you a watcher? Are you a listener? I'm sure you struggle to find any time during the term time to do any of these things. But when you are getting your content, where are you getting it from? And is there anything you'd be so kind as to recommend us?
I'm very fortunate, I think, to have had a faith for a long time, probably from about teenager time. Probably grew slightly haphazardly, though I was sort of raised a pretty conventional Anglican in that tradition. So quite a lot of the content comes from preparing to speak. So delivering sermons in chapel, delivering tale pieces to collective gatherings every week. It's in doing the preparing and the reading for that, knowing that you've got very few words, very few minutes in which to try and convey something for people to hold on to. That causes you to research, that causes you to look. So it's dozens of books, it's hundreds of resources. But that's part of the great joy of being ahead, actually, is, although of course giving these talks is part of the workload. What it causes you to do is to go to places, to read things, to find out about things that you never would have done. Yesterday, St. George's Day, did some research on that, discovered that the lance that George killed the dragon with was called Ascalon by tradition. Winston Churchill's private plane during the Second World War, he called it Ascalon, the lance that was going to, kill evil. Finding those sorts of things, I mean, just, it's fabulous. It's brilliant.
Great. It's great trivia to add to the sort of fabric of your day.
And you're weaving also the cultural history of your institution.
Do you carve time out deliberately in the diary for this kind of research and writing? It must have to be so structured to find the time to always
brilliantly haphazard, yes, or a combination of both. My children are 13, 8, and 6, so that sort of, I quite often have this sort of cluster around me whilst I'm trying to do this work and revision, asking me brilliantly provoking questions about, why are you doing that, Daddy? But lovely, because sometimes I talk to them about what I'm saying and they say, no, Daddy, that's boring. So, helpful to have onboard editors. Yes, it's quite rigorously structured in terms of time. But again, actually just being open to, right, I'm on this one. I've got to follow this one through. I'm exhilarated by it. I always have a notebook and a pen. Even when I'm going to something else, there's always a pencil and a postcard in my pocket. So when an idea strikes, it gets written down. Tube journeys, walking from somewhere to somewhere else. If an idea is coming, I'm very analog. It's ink on paper. I've just got to write it down, and then the thoughts begin to flow and develop. And some mystery arbitrary point in the last holiday, my speech day address just came to me. It's just whang. I'd say, sorry everyone, I just need to go and write some stuff down. In terms of content though, overall, if it's not too flippant to turn it the other way around, the book that I give to other people is The Man Who Planted Trees by Jean Giono. It's quite well known. I give it because it's short. You can read it in an evening. And it's a story about growth, but also about time. And I hope it leaves people uplifted.
That's a lovely recommendation. I'm going to chase that one. The one we've used here in the office a bit is The Go-Giver. I'm not sure if you've come across The Go-Giver. I'm kind of imagining it in some senses a little similar in terms of some messaging there. That sounds really great. The Man Who Planted Trees. Take that away. Okay, fantastic. I never want to push anyone into a corner, but I think education is such a complex place of so much going on, so much opinion, often so little action actually at national level. Perhaps there's an unpopular opinion you're happy to stand up behind and say, this is something I'm really proud to say is something I believe in, but if you disagree with me, I won't care.
I believe that some things are constant and eternal and true, and that not everything is relative, interpretable, or mutable. Humans have been educating their offspring for as long as there have been humans, and arguably I am an evolutionary biologist, so I would argue this. Before this species was this species, things like us have been raising children to be able to thrive in the societies that they have. So we have been being parents and educators for a very, very long time. And I think we have to trust to the things that have enabled us to survive, possibly more. And my reflex, if you like, my reflex controversial or unpopular opinion is that it's nearly never about a new initiative or the next shiny idea, actually. That if your institution is thriving and is going to carry on thriving, it's because you keep on going back to your values, to your core purpose, and strengthening the absolute pure quality of what you're doing. Is the teaching and learning great? Is the pastoral care great? Is what's going on outside the form room great? If you're doing that, number one, that's enough. That will take all of your time. If it's not, then you're probably not doing them well enough. And just keeping on going back to those quality elements, because that's what the children need. They don't need a new initiative or something shiny that everyone else seems to think is incredibly important. We thought screens were amazing 12 years ago. Now all the stuff on screens is telling you to put away your screen.
Can I ask, I was going to ask about new initiatives, but you sort of perhaps answered my question. But I am interested to know what next for Harrow and for you. Are there things you're particularly excited about as you're looking ahead in the second half of 2025 and beyond?
I think there's something that does need to be uncovered or brought to the fore, that as the independent sector deals with the incredible stress that has been put upon it, and this isn't a hold your breath moment and it'll go away. This is a paradigm shift of a type that possibly hasn't happened since people thought about independent education, which is a long time. It's making people understand better that what was driving us as independent schools was an incredibly strong, high moral purpose to do good in society. Every single school of which I have been a part or have ever heard of or have ever been a governor of or whatever, they all do great work in society with orders of magnitude more boys and girls than are in their institutions. All of the community and partnership work that's been going on for decades. As the independent sector is stressed, that is going to fall away. You add that into the sort of insight that we got with the film that became quite popular over the Easter holidays about, incel culture and teenagers. Flipping heck. It's no surprise. You took away the playing fields. You took away the youth clubs. You took away the places where kids could be kids and experience and enjoy each other's company as adolescents. And funnily enough, they find bad places instead. You add all of those things together and the pressure that's being put on the independent sector, further reducing or a hazard or a risk of further reducing the opportunities for young people who are outside independent education. And I begin to worry about how thin the fabric is getting that's holding society together. So I'm very deeply committed to us as a school maintaining what we do with community and partnerships. It's very expensive. It's millions of pounds, but it touches thousands of families' lives every year. And we do that because it's right, and it's because it's what our founder told us to do in the charter. And it's what great schools have always been doing. And I think we have to recognize that collectively, draw our breath and say, no, we're not just going to let it fall away. We're going to keep on doing this.
I think that's a lovely point to sort of finish on, really. And the work that Tim Dalton and the Shaftesbury Initiative, it's been a pin-up example of great partnership work for such a long time. I hope very much that it will continue and be a shining light to others in that space too. So last but not least, to finish us off, one piece of advice that you'd be happy to share that you'd stand up behind for those going through the sector. And I say sector always because some are teachers, some are educators in other spaces or environments, but what would your kind of your go-to piece of advice be for them?
I think it's the realization that every experience I've had has had a beneficial effect. I did some pretty crazy jobs when I was early on in education. Master in charge of new boy fives. How about that? Never put on a fives glove ever before. Master in charge of cups and trophies. That was a cracker. And a couple of others. And look, there could be any number of examples, but when I think now about how I do my work, how I work with colleagues who are developing their careers, every experience I had as a junior colleague wasn't actually sort of onerous, make work to keep the 20-somethings busy and to do the stuff that no one else wanted to do. It was actually an opportunity to grow, to develop, to put yourself in a place where you had to acquire new skills, had to relate to people differently, and so on and so forth. So never think that your time is being wasted because you've been asked to do a job that doesn't immediately feel like your best, most favorite thing. It's actually pushing you outwards, it's broadening you, it's forcing you to increase your scope. Turning that from the sort of the junior end of the spectrum to the senior end of the spectrum, I'm surprised as I look back over 6 years here at Harrow and 3 years at Repton of just how different my work as a leader has been over the course of that 9 years in total. Now, there've been some interesting things that have happened globally and nationally that have possibly forced that. But even so, going all the way back to those days at Manchester Grammar School, looking up at the High Master, who was this sort of immutable, isn't practically a sculpture, there's just this thing, entity, to where I am now, how dynamic, how change affected, and how exhilarating that is, actually, that I'm not going to be headmastering next academic year, probably the same as I was this academic year, because that's what's necessary and because that's what's good.
I hear lovely messages there in the first part of your answer in terms of sweep the sheds, wear many hats, get stuck in and not worry about what those hats might mean for the future. And then secondly, I think a lovely kind of growth mindset approach to leadership there in terms of recognize that it will change and develop and the fabric of what you do will be different all the time. And that's what will make it interesting and a challenge. Alastair, you've shared lots very eloquently with us, as expected, and it's been a real treat to better understand you and to understand the kind of leadership and the thought that goes into running a great school like Harrow. So thank you very much for joining us. I know this will be a really valuable resource to those who listen to it, and we wish you well for the rest of the academic year and beyond.
Thanks, Henry.